Today we're going to be checking out 4 different AAA titles on the OLED Steam Deck. This is just kind of a fun little test to see how far we can push this device and what kind of frame rates we're getting at what different settings. We're going to be testing each game at low, medium, high, and ultra settings just to see how far we can really push this. We're going to go through Red Dead Redemption, God of War, Lies of P, and Genshin Impact. If you like these types of videos, make sure to subscribe, leave me a comment with some more game ideas that I should be testing. Without any further delay, let's jump into it. As always, we're gonna start things off nice and easy at the low settings. Honestly, I was really hoping to see at least a solid 60 frames per second, but we're actually seeing quite a huge variant. It absolutely goes into the 60s, but we'll dip down all the way to 40 sometimes. For the most part, it looks like we're chilling right around the mid 50s. If we're inside an area that's a little bit smaller, then it's chilling at the 60 frames per second. But playing this game at low settings is phenomenal. This game looks incredible. Low was easy work, so now we're gonna go up to what they call original, which is basically medium.
You were hiding in the trees or back for more. Go on.
Jumping up to original really did take quite a hit to the frames per second. Still great, we're almost always above 40 frames per second, so if you wanted to lock in at 40 or 45 frames per second, I'm a big fan of the 40 to 45 frames per second on these handheld PCs, and then being able to just lock it in with a little bit of a higher quality is typically the way I go. This is honestly how I would probably play this game. However, let's not speak too soon, because who knows, this game might perform great at high settings. So let's jump in. It looks like it's just trying desperately to stay above that 30 frames per second and possibly into the 35s area, but basically we're here at the 30 frames per second at high settings on the Steam Deck with God of War, which is pretty impressive, not gonna lie. If you really want that quality life, you can do that on the OLED Steam Deck. 30 frames per second, 38, 39, it's doable for sure. But if you want to lock it at 30 frames per second so that we don't get those dips that go below 30 frames per second, we can also do that and just run all day long at a solid 30 frames per second and probably rarely, if ever, getting a dip under 30 frames per second. This is at high settings. Not bad.
You did it!
You did it indeed. This is another viable option for all you people who want the really high quality stuff. But what if you could play at ultra 30 frames per second? And, well, 25 frames per second. We're getting like mid 20s on ultra. So it doesn't look like Ultra is going to be on the table with God of War. Now, of course, you could probably get some mods or something, or until they release FSR 3 and all those kind of things, or I could dump down the resolution. But dudes, just play it high, not Ultra. And then just for fun, let's go back all the way up to 90 Hertz on the Steam Deck at Ultra and see what happens. And what do you know? 37, 39, 41. Again, this is like a little area. It's a little bit easier, but we're kind of hanging above 30 pretty much until that moment right there. Dipped down a tiny bit, came back up. I guess if you really desperately wanted to play at Ultra, you probably could, but it just seemed to be a lot more stable at high and still looked incredible.
No place for a boy.
So playing at full HD, actually, what I've been doing a lot playing this game is wearing my Viture XR Pro glasses. It's a fantastic way to experience playing these games, especially when like on an airplane or just lounging around at the house. You can use my code Joshua Gray to get 10% off the accessories that you buy with the glasses. I also have a whole entire video where I showcase everything I like and some of my gripes with these glasses. Red Dead Redemption 2, so pull up your britches and get ready, because the first test that we're gonna do is the lowest possible options, of course. Let's give the Steam Deck the best optimal chances of impressing us. Before we start talking about frames per second and all that jargon, this game looks incredible at the lowest possible settings that you can put it at. So it's very reasonable to think about playing this game in these settings. But with that said, we're kind of chilling at the 45 to mid 50 frames per second here, which is not optimal. It would have been great to see this game hit the 60 frames per second, but it looks good and it's very playable. Red Dead has a ton of quality presets, so we're gonna stay inside the performance, but at the top end of performance. So I'm gonna call this performance high. And honestly, it's kind of crushing going up that much in the quality. It's still hanging out at that 45 to 50 some frames per second, even with us riding along next to all of these other characters and these horses. If I'm being honest, I'm really not actually noticing that much of a graphical difference. It looks so good at the absolute lowest. This also looks good. Now it's time to jump into balanced. And I'm not gonna start at the lowest one because that would be one tier up. I'm in the middle of balance. Balanced middle is what we will call this. This should go without saying, but unfortunately, I think I need to mention it. This isn't exactly the most controlled environment in which I test the frames per second of games. Although I do consider myself quite the scientist of testing the game's frames per second, you must realize this is a more real-life experience that you're seeing. And that might be why we're seeing higher frames per second all of a sudden. So let's jump up to even higher presets. We're gonna call this one Balanced High. It's the highest balance settings you can pick. It's staying right about 40 frames per second, which is really quite nice. You could maybe even lock it into 40. I don't know. It's playing perfectly fine. 40 frames per second in this game is plenty of frames per second. And at balanced high, it's looking incredible. Every so often, it's dipping into the high 30s, but in reality, this is a solid 40 frames per second experience. Now we're gonna jump up one level to get into quality. Now we're favoring that quality. Is it gonna make that much of a difference? We do have an argument here to make that it is impacting the frames per second by a couple. Now it's chilling at the high 30s, rarely going into the 40s, but it's fine. Guys, if you want that quality life, you can do this. It is doable. I believe in you. You can handle it. Now it's time to really challenge the Steam Deck here. Can the OLED Steam Deck handle what I'm calling quality medium? Because it's in the middle of the quality settings. What do you know? 31, 30, 29. That's scary. I know. You're so afraid right now, but please don't fret. Take a deep breath. You can play this at quality medium at around 30 frames per second, and it's buttery smooth. It's a good experience. And maybe to help it, we're gonna frame limit to 30 frames per second. And pray to the Valve gods to give us a solid 30 frames per second. And I don't want to speak too soon, but we're getting a rock hard 30 frames per second. Almighty Valve gods! Oh, no. Oh, it's too soon. We praised the Almighties too soon. When you're around a bunch of players, it dips down. But if you really need that quality life, I think it's doable. You can do it. Now it's time to get psychotic. This is the maxed out quality ultra settings. And the OLED Steam Deck isn't super happy about this. It feels personal. It feels as though the Steam Deck wants me to know that I'm hurting it, that I'm pushing it beyond its limits. You know how I know this? I know this because it's been playing at mid-20s this entire time. So yeah, no, I mean, I guess you could do this. but maybe just don't. To stress it out even more, I'm gonna max out its GPU at 1600 and see if we can push it and get 30 frames per second.
Yep.
More like, nope. That didn't do anything. It might have made it worse. To be fair, it handled every single quality preset until the very last one. It was playable on every single one before it. So it just depends on what you want out of the game. It honestly looks fantastic at all the different ones. So I'm probably going to opt in for one that has a little bit of a higher frames per second. Lies of P on the OLED Steam Deck. FSR is going to be on quality here at the end. We're going to mess around with that. But for now, it's going to be quality from low all the way to best. We're going to start things off nice and easy, hitting that low, everything set to low. I just now picked this game up, and I'm kind of wondering why I waited so long. Because look at this. Mid 70 frames per second. 80 frames per second. Guys, this game looks beautiful. The game developers did such an amazing job on optimizing this game. I just wish more developers would do this. This is a newer AAA title that is running so good on the Steam Deck. All right, low was easy work, so we're gonna bump things up to medium. And even at medium, we are easily staying above 60. In reality, we're still hanging out at the mid 70s. Here and there, it's dipping down into the low 60s, but it doesn't look like it's ever going below 60 frames per second. So even setting this game to medium is a very realistic option to play, because you're always above 60, but you're hanging out in the mid 70s all the time as well. All right, another easy one for it. So we're gonna jump up to high and see if it can keep up. And here it is. Here we go. Now we're in the 50s. Low 50s at that. Sometimes hopping into the mid 50s. But again, we are at high settings here. If you really wanted to play this game at high, you could cap at 45 frames per second and have a flawless and beautiful experience. This game just really is taking advantage of this OLED screen. Everything looks so good. Now we're gonna jump up to the highest settings, which they call best. So this is everything set to best. And it's honestly not doing too much worse. A couple frames per second less than we were getting at high. We're getting in those low 40s, but even jumping into the mid 50s again. So even at best, you could probably lock this in at a 45 frames per second and have a pretty seamless experience. Or just keep it uncapped like this and just fluctuate from the mid 40s into the mid 50s. So that was all of the settings from low to best with FSR set to quality. But now we're gonna boost FSR to performance and see how many more frames per second we can get out of this. The settings are maxed out at best. We changed FSR to performance, and now we're staying above that 50 frames per second. Even in the high 50s. We're not at that 60. That would have been pretty epic if we could have been at the highest possible quality settings and locked in at a 60 frames per second, but it doesn't look like we're getting that. We are hitting 60 frames per second every once in a while here. Man, this game is just so well optimized. Okay, we just gotta see, can we get to 60 frames per second? We're gonna go to highest performance. Oh, it is so close. 58, 57, 59. And now it's jumping to mid 50s. And then every once in a while just dancing in those 60s. Well, now it just randomly jumped to 69, 72. Okay, these frames per second were all over the place. Maybe it just needed a minute to adjust. Because now we're absolutely staying above 60 frames per second. To be honest though, it visually looks worse than it would at low settings. All right, that's enough of ultra performance. We're gonna bump it back down to performance and then the quality preset to high. maybe these settings will give us a above 60 frames per second without a problem and not give us such a downgrade in quality. So far, this is looking great. We're staying above 60. Okay, it dipped down a little bit below, but I bet you could even lock this in at 60 frames per second and have a pretty solid 60 the whole time. If you weren't watching the frames per second, you wouldn't even know. It's just all this FPS peeping makes people go a little crazy. They go, oh, that's not 60 frames per second. But that's because they're just staring at a little number in the corner of the screen. They're not even just playing the game. I digress. Now, we're going to go down to medium. FSR performance. What are we going to get here? It was like 80, jumped down to 60, back up to 80. It takes it like a little bit here to lock into where it's going to go. This is like a little tiny spot. We're at 85. That's wonderful. But then it just jumped all the way to 48? 55? Is this going to stabilize? Where are we gonna land with the frames per second? All right, this one is just kind of all over the place. It honestly wasn't as high. I was thinking in the 70s was gonna be the norm, but it was kind of just jumping all over the place. Well, 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 this brings us all the way back to where we began. Low. But now, performance. So hopefully, we're gonna see a major increase, which we kind of are. 80, high 70s. A little while ago, we hit an 85 frames per second. When it was set on FSR quality, it was having a harder time maintaining above 70 frames per second. Now we're always above 70 and easily going into the 80s all the time. So there was definitely an increase in performance setting it to FSR performance. All right, and just for fun, let's just max out the GPU manually and see if that gives us a little bit more. And it's not. No, we're not even getting into the 80s now. So I'm probably bottlenecking like the CPU and putting too much to the GPU and all that stuff. But this was just a little test. I just wanted to see. So don't hate on me. What should I have set this to? What do you think would make it even better? I think it was doing a good job without me messing with it. So I'm just not gonna do that anymore. So I'm gonna go back, turn that off. But now I wanna go through a couple more with the frame limit set to 73 frames per second or hertz, whatever you wanna call it. Okay, so we're still at low settings FSR performance, but now we're capping it at 73 hertz. And I'm a little sad. I was thinking it was gonna do this with no hiccups. We are getting a few dips here and there. Also, the pulsing going across the screen right now, that is not something you can see with your eyes. This is just the hertz of the screen and the camera conflicting with each other, so ignore that. But I'm kind of done with this test. It wasn't that helpful. We were never really staying locked at 73, so it doesn't even matter. So I'm gonna go back to 90 hertz, keep everything uncapped, and now we are going to do a custom setting. We'll change FSR2 to balanced, and then inside these settings, everything's set to medium right now, but we're going to dump shadow quality to low, texture quality to high, effect quality to low. We're also going to dump down shading, reflections, and the fog quality to low. Okay, so this is our custom settings, and we're going to give it a minute to figure its life out before we start really paying attention to that frames per second. But again, this game, even at all low settings, looks great. So bumping a few things up a little bit from medium and textures at high, this looks awesome. And we're getting above 60 frames per second all the time, so even if you wanted, you could just cap it at 60. But keeping it uncapped, obviously, sometimes you're getting stuff into the 80s. Overall, Lies of P on the OLED Steam Deck is a perfect new AAA title for this device. It's utilizing the 90 hertz OLED screen beautifully, and the performance we're getting out of this game and the way it looks is awesome.
Genshin Impact and how it performs on the OLED Steam Deck. You can check out another video that I made on how to install Genshin on your Steam Deck, and we're gonna see how well this thing performs. I think that's it. Let's jump into it. Okay, so Genshin has a lowest, low, medium, high, and custom. So we're gonna go through all of those and include a custom option at the end. Lowest defaulted it to 30 frames per second, but I'm gonna jump that up. All right, here we go. Lowest settings, 60 frames per second. How's the game gonna do? I'm hoping that we're gonna get a solid 60 frames per second out of this. And what do you know? Oh, unfortunately it's dipping into the 58 to 60, but in reality, you'd have to be just staring at that FPS counter to even notice that that's happening. Except right there, that was intense. What was that all about? Definitely having some stutters here and there, but for the most part, it's playing really smooth. And it looks awesome on the OLED Steam Deck screen. We need to find some enemies. Even like right there was some stutters and whatnot, which is interesting. We're also getting 4+ hours of playtime on low settings. So if battery life matters to you, the OLED Steam Deck is the PC handheld king. After playing for a little while, it seems that 60 frames per second is pretty locked in now, and it's not having much of an issue at all. Where are all the enemies? All right, lowest, not a problem. Now it's time to switch over to low. Low is also defaulting to 30 FPS, so I'm gonna jump that up to 60. I have a feeling this is gonna run pretty much the same. It does look a little bit better, and we're still at that 60 frames per second, dipping a little bit here and there, but again, not noticeable at all. So it probably wouldn't be necessary to play it in lowest, unless you did want to cap it at the 30 frames per second, hit it to all the lowest, and get the most battery life possible. We had a little bit of a dip there into the 50s, 40. It's a little stuttery. Honestly, I was hoping it would play a little bit smoother than this. It's definitely playable, even with the stutters. That doesn't affect much, but it would have been really nice to have just a full-on solid 60 frames per second. All right, 60 frames per second, easy work at lowest settings. So now let's jump in and go up to medium, which is what they say is the default settings. Now we'll just jump back in the game, see how it performs. And right off the bat, we are getting a nice 60 frames per second, which is great. At medium settings, everything's looking awesome on the OLED screen. It doesn't seem to be performing much worse at medium than it was even at lowest. What is happening is we're using more watts, so we lost about 45+ minutes of game time. I'm never worried about the battery life on this device because I'm never playing games for 3+ hours or even 2 hours. So some of the other handhelds that maybe die within an hour, that could be a little stressful, but the OLED is kind of a sweet spot for battery life. Of course, more would be great, but in the time and age, it is so much further ahead than all the other devices in terms of battery life. Let's put it this way. I just never think about the battery because it's fine. I charge it after I'm done playing with it, and when I want to play, I can just pick it up and play for as long as I want. Yeah, this is having no issues. Medium, 60 frames per second, not a problem. Okay, shall we go up to high? All right, high is the last settings. They don't have like an ultra, but I do think there's a couple settings that we can tweak up higher after this. And even at high, we are still maintaining 60 frames per second, which is great. Every single level of this game, we can play it at. It still has these micro stutters like just happened right there. I'm not sure if that's like all of that. So at high, oh yeah, we're getting a lot right there. They don't last very long, and then it goes right back to 60 frames per second. So if you really want the quality to be the best, you can definitely play it this way. As long as you don't mind every once in a while when it just dips and does some weird stuff. But in a game like Genshin, that doesn't matter that much. Let's be real. And having everything at high settings looks awesome. Look at this dog. Will he dig? Oh my gosh, he's a happy dog. High settings, easy, not a problem. All right, now we just want to check if there's any other settings that weren't maxed out. So they don't have an Ultra, but I do think there are some things. I wish you could do 120 or 90, 75 frames per second, but they just don't let you do that, which is really lame. I don't know why they do. Okay, render resolution maxed out, 1.5. High, 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 highest. Keep that on FSR2. On, extreme, on, high, on, and then this one, 16. Okay, this is what we will deem ultra. Everything is maxed out. You can't do it any more than this. And there we go. Now we're dipping. We're in the 30s to 40 frames per second. Looks awesome. So the OLED Steam Deck can definitely handle every single possible setting configuration that you can do in Genshin Impact. Unfortunately, at this ultra settings, we're not gonna get that 60 frames per second, but it's dancing in the high 30s into the 40s. But now the battery has cut in half. We have 2 hours and 20 minutes now. So it's definitely working a lot harder at maxed out settings. But again, what a great option to have, to be able to play the game at the full maxed out settings on a handheld PC. Another thing I wanted to try is capping the frame rate at 34 frames per second and see if we could maintain 34 at these ultra settings. And it really actually looks like that helped a lot. It's not fluctuating nearly as much as it was before capping the hertz of the screen, which is amazing. 34 frames per second at all maxed out settings. This isn't a bad way to play. I wonder if we could get it up even from there. Let's just go all the way to 40.
Oh, isn't it?
All right, 40 is too much. It's chilling at that 35, 36, 37. Maybe it'll go up. Let's give it a minute. So it can't maintain 40, but it is pretty close. So you could cap it at 40 just so you get a little bit better, but it is definitely fluctuating more, where the previous one was really locked in quite nicely, because this is struggling to get to 40 very often. We're at the mid 30s most of the time, and I'm sure if you jumped into a battle, it would just get crazy, as in bad, not good. Not too shabby. This is pretty impressive. The OLED Steam Deck, though underpowered compared to many of the handhelds on the market, still performs and is so much more convenient in every other way that it's hard to justify the cost of some of these other handhelds right now. Not that I wouldn't love some. I want to try out many of them. If you'd like me to try out any games, please leave it in the comment, or if you have questions about anything, I pretty much comment back to every single person. Sorry if I didn't to you. You're one of the 1% who I didn't. I apologize. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.